Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe, but you can call me KC. In today's episode is what I'm hoping to be sort of an exciting topic, covering 10 fantasy series that I want to read after I finish The Wheel of Time. Of course, I'm holding up the 7th book of The Wheel of Time, A Crown of Swords, because at the time of my recording and at the time of this video's release, I am just starting / in the middle of A Crown of Swords. So I'm not necessarily super far into Wheel of Time, but I'm also not necessarily super far from the end either. I'm kind of basically right in the middle, all things considered. So I decided I wanted to look ahead at some of the series that I wanted to read after I'm done with Wheel of Time. Since I've started the Wheel of Time, there have been a few series that I've already read. So series that you're not going to see in this video are things like the Adan trilogy, which I read fairly early on in my Wheel of Time journey. Really liked the Adan trilogy. Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, which I started pretty close to the time that I started Wheel of Time, relatively speaking, and only finished pretty recently. I have videos on all of the books in both of those series, including like whole series ratings and stuff like that. And then I think as well, by the time I'm finished with the Wheel of Time, I'll have finally finished the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien, and therefore probably doing a Lord of the Rings reread either in the middle or maybe even very shortly after the Wheel of Time. So these are some things that you're not going to see technically on the list proper. This doesn't necessarily mean that none of the series that I'm going to discuss in today's video are series that I would consider starting or even reading entirely while I'm still reading the Wheel of Time. But because the Wheel of Time is my primary fantasy focus for the moment, most of these are probably not going to happen until afterwards to one degree or another. Keep in mind, this list, of course, is just a sort of general interest list for me. It doesn't necessarily indicate for sure like my priorities as far as like what order I'm going to read the series or which ones I'm going to prioritize first upon reading Wheel of Time, or even necessarily a priority of which ones I may give a shot while I'm still reading the series. For example, I actually organized it more by length than I did by interest. In fact, every odd numbered entry in this list, so 9, 7, 5, 3, and 1, are all trilogies, and all of the other entries are non-trilogies. So that should definitely put something in perspective there. But without further ado, let's jump into the honorable mentions. So a couple series that don't make the proper top 10 for one reason or another. First off, I want to give a shout out to Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. The first reason this is only an honorable mention is because it's multiple sub-series within one series. So that's like kind of a way that I was like, yeah, but how do you include this on a list like this? So that's like my autistic brain getting in the way of putting this on the list proper, but also because generally speaking, my interest in this is actually a little bit lower than everything else on the list for one reason or another, even though the hype around Hobb and Realm of the Elderlings is quite high. I understand, but for some reason, my personal interest isn't quite as high as the hype has kind of led me to believe it should be, which is something that I almost feel bad about, but also, you know, it's just an honorable mention. That's how things go. The other honorable mention is a standalone, so obviously it can't really fit on the fantasy series I want to read after Wheel of Time, but I am going to give a shout out to Elantris by Brandon Sanderson because, well, it is the only standalone on the list, so I decided not to leave it on the actual list proper, like I said. But the other reason why this isn't on the list, aside from it just being a standalone, is also because there's another item on the list from Sanderson which cheats the list a little bit, which you'll see a little bit later that does actually fit, you know, sort of in the series category. And because Elantris is going to be my first Brandon Sanderson book that I read that isn't from the Wheel of Time, figured that I would just shout out Elantris and say, hey, yeah, that's a fantasy story that I'm going to read after Wheel of Time because it's by that author and also going to be the first Cosmere book I read. So, you know, that's the inclusion for the honorable mentions. But now we're going to go into the actual top 10. The first item is going to be at number 10, Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson, or rather Malazan, or however you want to pronounce this series. This will probably be a huge investment, the likes of what will take several years to read, kind of like The Wheel of Time. In fact, there's a degree to me that thinks that even though this is 10 books instead of 15, I may even take longer to read Malazan than Wheel of Time. So the likelihood that I'll jump into Malazan shortly after Wheel of Time is pretty low, I confess. But it is definitely a series that I have a lot of interest in. This is one that I'm kind of looking at covering on the channel in a sort of similar but also different way to Wheel of Time. I've been doing spoiler talks, reading diaries, however you want to call those, for Wheel of Time as I've been reading the series. I think I intend to do something similar, but like I said, a little bit different with Malazan. Not sure what that would entail. Maybe it would be something that I do with Philip Chase on the channel, since this is his favorite series, and I think having a guide through the series would definitely aid my personal experience. Like I said, kind of want to do a reading diary thing for these as well, but probably not quite so frequently and extensively as the Wheel of Time, probably more like monthly rather than weekly. Take it really slow, not really sure, but either way, Malazan is a bucket list item for me, and I'm fascinated by the idea of it. I'm fascinated by the idea of reading it, but like I said, because it's going to be such a huge investment, I'm not necessarily super inclined to jump into that right after finishing Wheel of Time, so it's lower on the list for that reason. I definitely need to break up a few years before I do that. Number 9 on the list is going to be the proper Brandon Sanderson entry on the list. That is obviously for the Mistborn trilogy, which, you know, this is the other part of why Elantris isn't on the list proper, is because this is the series. After Elantris, Mistborn will be my first Sanderson read, so Mistborn will be my first Sanderson series. At least Era 1 will be my first Sanderson series. Not 100% sure what my order through the Cosmere will be after that. No, I don't need your suggestions, because it's going to be a few years before I get to that point anyway, and I'll come to the decision myself when I get there. But I know for sure that I'm interested in Mistborn. I'm pretty excited for Mistborn, but I do need to get through the end of Wheel of Time first before I give that a try. Next up at number 8 is a series that I don't actually see a whole lot of buzz on BookTube, at least necessarily in a super active sense these days. That is Rhaenyra Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan, which is sort of a fudged up kind of entry on the list here, because technically, based off of the editions of this series that I have, Rhaenyra is sort of a trilogy, but for the sake of this being a series in a series spot on the list, I decided to count it as 6 for the sake of, you know, the list and my arbitrary quote-unquote rules for it. So, you know, think of this however you will. Either way, I know that I'm interested in Rhaenyra. I know strangely little about the series beyond the fact that Royce and Hadrian are considered to be a very great dynamic duo. What I do know from it is that it gets a lot of praise from very many, and it sounds like it would be a pretty quick and fun series. And frankly, what other reason do I need to read something of this sort? For something different, that series is definitely a go and on my interest. Number 7 on the list is another proper trilogy to actually make a normal trilogy spot, even though this, ironically enough, was not meant to be a trilogy. This is Brian Lee Durfee's 5 Warrior Angels series, which has had comparisons to things like Faithful and the Fallen before. I'm not sure the validity of those statements. I'm sure I'll make videos about the validity of those kinds of statements whenever I get around to actually reading the series, but 5 Warrior Angels was supposed to be 5 books originally, but was turned into a trilogy. So in some sense, these two series, Rhaenyra and 5 Warrior Angels, could also be sort of swapped on the list just by technicalities of how they currently exist or were supposed to exist, or however it is that you want to talk about them. This is one that I'm excited for. I got to meet Brian very briefly here recently over the weekend of Dragonsteel Nexus in 2024. He was very stand-up guy, very chill dude, actually, ironically enough. You wouldn't expect him to be so chill from the way that he composes himself in his videos, but he's very chill. I really enjoyed getting to talk to him very briefly. But I'm excited to read the books. Not sure what to expect from them. I know plenty of people that really like them. I know plenty of people who also really don't. So we'll see how my reaction to them ends up being. Next up is one of the more unique series on the list. At number 6 is The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. And the reason why Dandelion Dynasty is a little bit different is likely because The Grace of Kings, to start off, is kind of like an amalgamation between an epic fantasy story and also like short story collection, in the sense that it's kind of like more telling bluntly the sort of history of stuff kind of going on with a little bit more disconnected focus on the characters and the events and whatnot happening, rather than being more of a traditional narrative, the way that, say, The Wall of Storms ends up being in the second book. But knowing about that stuff going in is sure to help me enjoy the series a little bit more when I come around to the Grace of Kings. I've been intrigued by the series for a long time, even though I can't say it's necessarily super high priority. Item number 5 is when we're moving into a couple more heavy hitters, at least some of the ones that I'm more excited to be really getting into sooner than later, we'll say. This is also technically halfway cheating here, because the series is actually 4 books, but it's also 3 at the same time. If you know the author, Tad Williams, you know exactly what I mean here, the master of 4-book trilogies. This is, of course, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. This is a trilogy in my editions, even though the original versions were technically split into 4 books, because the Green Angel Tower is absolutely massive. But for classic fantasy, I gotta admit, I'm kind of a sucker for it. Sort of those classical elements are a lot of what I just kind of really like. That kind of vibe is good, considering that Tad is considered to be one of the more masters of that kind of thing within Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I figure I have reasons to be excited for the series. Also, considering the popularity of this one, and especially with the sequel series tacked onto it, I feel like I just kind of have to read this one sooner than later. I'm looking forward to it. And I also feel like I have to read this one a little bit sooner than some other series, just because I know plenty of people who've like kind of gone back to this one after having read a whole ton of other modern fantasy stuff and not necessarily loved it because of how much it relies on the classic. Who knows if that kind of a thing would affect me, but this is one that I'm excited to read nonetheless. It might even be relatively shortly after I do my reread of Lord of the Rings, just because of that sort of classic fantasy appeal, kind of going from the classic to the modern idea, that sort of blend in between. Either way, I'm excited to try out some Tad Williams, so I'm excited for Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Next up, at number 4 on the list, I'm going to move this down here so that this stack doesn't necessarily fall down on me, because it's looking like it might. Next up, number 4 on the list is The Witcher by Sapkowski. I'm not going to try to say the first name because I would absolutely butcher it. This is maybe not the most popular pick as a result of The Witcher just generally kind of getting quite mixed reception among English speakers. Apparently the translation for the series, the main translation that exists for this, is not great, and then there's never been another translation since then, which is kind of unfortunate. I had always heard just how good the author's prose is apparently in the native language or the original language of the books, and for some reason I had not really caught that was kind of a difference there for a while. It was only until a couple years after I bought the series that I realized that people didn't really have a lot of kind things to say about the English translations of it. Like I said, kind of unfortunate, but either way, I think I'm going into the series with the right mindset. Beyond the translation, I'm aware of what people often bounce off of the series from, the sort of reasons why certain people just don't really click with it or dislike it. So in that way, I ought not to be too super bothered by it. Hopefully not anyway. But every time I think about the series, I kind of get more excited to try it. But not sure when it'll be. It might be pretty soon because, you know, these short story collections are short. Even the main series itself is pretty short. So compared to basically everything else on this list, Witcher is pretty obtainable in that kind of way. But now we move into the top 3 fantasy series that I want to read after Wheel of Time. This is going to have a popular pick, a less popular pick, and a pick that probably the vast majority of people here don't know about or haven't heard of too extensively. Let's start off with the unpopular pick. That is the Lycanius trilogy by James Islington. Yes, I know Will of the Many exists. Yes, I know. I don't really care because the series isn't finished at this point, and I also have an interest in Lycanius. In fact, amongst other trilogies and other series, why this one is ranking so high up here is because, well, this was one of the earliest read-alongs that I wanted to join back in like April, May, June of 2022. So at this point, it's been just about 3 years since I was like, I really want to join that, but no, I can't because I don't have time and because I don't read quickly enough to justify it. And I've been itching to get back to this ever since. I know that there are plenty of people who don't love the trilogy. In fact, plenty who think it's pretty garbage. I know there are some people who enjoy the first book but who don't like anything afterwards. I have my hopes high for this one, but I'm also going into it with realistic expectations based off of other people's reactions. My main thing is that just something about this, just I feel like it's going to click for me, or even if it doesn't, it's not going to not click, if that makes any sense. Something about Licanius, I just feel like I'm going to enjoy. The FOMO for the trilogy just simply never died in the time since the original read-along that I was going to join it for. So I do want to circle back around to it. I still don't know when it's going to be, but I do really want to circle back around to that one. Next up at number 2 is probably, well, I've already talked about FOMO a little bit just with the last item. This might be like the biggest FOMO that I've had for a series in recent years, however, and that is The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. And I'm holding up like some of the paperbacks for The Fall and Of Blood and Fire, but I don't actually own any of the other physical editions of this book, but I want to get hardcovers for these because the hardcovers, even the self-pub version of the hardcovers, are supposedly way nicer quality than these paperbacks were, and the paperbacks were simply just too expensive for how relatively low quality they were, so I just didn't collect more of them. But Bound and the Broken is definitely a huge series on my TBR, huge series on my bucket list, one that I really want to get to. I almost feel like hopping on it now, with the end of the series in sight. This is in early 2025, of course, so it'll probably be within approximately a couple of years when the series is finished, depending, of course, on what Ryan's writing pace looks like with a new baby in the house. So I don't know when I'm going to start Bound and the Broken, but like if there's any of the series on this list that I'm talking about today that I'm likely to start before I'm done with Faithful, or before I'm done with The Wheel of Time, that's the series. Bound and the Broken is probably the one that I'm likely to start pretty soon. In fact, here after Sun Eater is finished, the series right up here, that last book is going to be publishing most likely at the end of 2025. By the time I finish reading the last book in that series, I'm probably just going to hop over and start reading Bound and the Broken because I feel like it's going to be a hit for me. I'm really looking forward to it. It's kind of a similar thing going on with it, with like novellas in between various of the books and not being necessarily that long of a series. Bound and the Broken is only 5 books going to be by the end of it, even those books are generally a little bit longer than Sun Eater. And I'm just kind of rambling at this point, but I really think I'm going to enjoy Bound and the Broken a lot. I'm really looking forward to it. Like I said, huge FOMO as well. And I think I might as well jump on to the series bandwagon and actually start reading it here while Ryan is kind of gearing up to write the last book, preparing for that here pretty soon. That's something that I kind of want to be around for. I want to be on the bandwagon. I want to be on the train, like entering the station when the last book actually comes out. So maybe that's something that I try reading in 2025. I haven't committed to that yet, but that might just be something that I go ahead and try doing. But last, and definitely not least, because it is number 1 on the list, is the Legacy trilogy by Matthew Ward. Like I said, one that probably a lot of people haven't really heard of. This is a trilogy made up of Legacy of Ash, Legacy of Steel, and Legacy of Light. If you like this cover design, and that's attractive to you, because it was certainly attractive to me, the other covers are blue and gold and sort of a similar cover style. Frankly, the covers are a lot of why I'm attracted to these so much. I seriously don't know how to explain why this is so high up on the list. I just know that I want to get to it as soon as possible. It's one that I've been kind of like pushing off since 2022, like each handful of months, definitely each year I've looked at it and been like, soon, I'll get to you soon, trademark, because again, I don't know how to explain like why it's on the list. It just is. Something about the covers, the concept just seems like something that I'm just so excited to read inexplicably without explanation. I don't have an explanation for why. It's just there. Like I said, I've been pushing it back ever since 2022. I think I'm pushing it back again this year, favoring Of Blood and Bone by John Gwynne to read at some point later this year. Just something that'll probably end up happening. Not entirely sure. I might do Bound and the Broken instead. We'll see. But this is one that's like, I keep looking at and being like, I want to read you very soon. I want to get you very soon. And it just never happens, and I feel so bad about it. I don't know why I'm so intent on this trilogy. I've said it a million times so far, but like, hopefully I get to it very soon. The main problem with the trilogy, actually, and probably the main reason why it gets pushed off so much, is because it's like 750, 800 pages a book, like for all 3 books. That's pretty long, so like it's hard to prioritize something made up of books that chunky in that regard. But like, I really want to get to the Legacy trilogy. Don't know when that'll be. I hope it's soon, but it's number one on the list because it's like, it's the one that I've been pushing off and had like, you know, my personal eye on for the longest so far of any of these series on here. It's one that I really want to try. Maybe if enough people decide to give it a try soon enough, maybe I'll just decide to join on a bandwagon and say, hey, yeah, I'll read that with you because I can, and like just hell with all of the other books on my TBR, you know. So anyway, this is the end of the list. I've been rambling and talking a lot. I'm sorry about how long this video was and probably how little I've said about anything, how worthless your time being here was spent. But I appreciate you spending your time here, if nothing else. This is my list of the top 10 books or top 10 fantasy series that I want to read after The Wheel of Time, even though maybe one or two of these I end up reading before I'm actually done with the series. Who knows? We'll see what happens on that type of thing. So there's plenty of other fantasy series I could have included on this list, so this isn't, you know, a conclusive or an exhaustive list. There are several fantasy light series that I considered including, or that I could have included on this list, that I'll probably make like a top 5 video at some point in time. There are also several YA series, YA fantasy specific series, that also were originally on the list or were in consideration for the list. Again, I might just do a top YA series that I'm looking forward to reading at some point and make that again its own type of video. But this list is basically just adult epic fantasy, more specifically, and these are more or less my highest priorities as far as those things go, and things could definitely change, because it's going to be a couple years before, oh, a couple years is probably wrong, it's going to be like a little over a year before I'm done with The Wheel of Time, so I have some time. Like, things are definitely going to change, but I felt like getting a version of this video out. In fact, I had a draft of this video done like a year ago. I didn't record the video, but I had the notes for the video, and that list compared to this version of the list, very different from each other. So I guarantee that by the time I'm actually done with Wheel of Time, the list will be a little bit different. So we'll see. Maybe I'll do like a sort of vote thing and like pick a couple of these series, make a poll for people to do after I'm done with Wheel of Time, be like, which one of these should I start next type of thing. Who knows? If you want to join along for the ride as I'm finishing The Wheel of Time and as I'm considering reading some of these other series, whatever else I read in the meantime, consider subscribing if you haven't. I would greatly appreciate it. It would mean the world to me. But thank you once again for watching this video if you did, and if you survived the rambling. I'm sorry. I effusively apologize for how much I've rambled in this video compared to normal. I will get out of your face now, however, so that I, you know, don't end up doing that too much here at the end of the... I'm rambling again. Thank you for watching. I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me Casey, and I hope to see you in the next video, God willing, if you're able to stand me for another second.